And the last I would say is around authentic engagement. And by that, I mean, just recognizing we don't have all the answers. We don't have all the ideas. We want to actually harness the creativity, the brilliance of our community. I mean, universities are stuffed full of brilliant people. And creative people. They're fabulous, fabulous organizations to work in because there's so much, fascinating diversity and brilliance in universities. If you want to harness that, you have to be authentic. So it means rethinking what you might want to do because you get really compelling alternative ideas and feedback. So I think those ideas around clarity of vision, structured co-design, and authentic engagement, if you do those things, I think you're more likely to get stakeholder buy-in and produce sustainable change.
Welcome to this special episode, The Outer Game of Change. In these unique episodes, I am joined by leaders and executives who drive change and shape the future of their organizations and their sectors. We listen to their unique insights, explore how they perceive change, and uncover what is simmering in their minds. Today, I am thrilled to have with me Professor Theo Farrell, the 7th Vice-Chancellor and President of Trobe University here in Australia. Professor Farrell has a distinguished career in academia and research, having held leadership positions at top universities around the world. He's an author and a renowned advocate for academic excellence, inclusivity, and transformative change. Most importantly, I find Theo to be a great human. In this episode, we will dive into the dynamics of change leadership, exploring how transformative forces like AI are reshaping higher education. We discuss the evolving nature of academia, the challenges and opportunities of integrating advanced technologies, and what it takes to lead an institution through such significant transformation. With his extensive background in both strategic leadership and research, Professor Farrell offers unique insights into the future of higher education and how universities can adapt to and thrive in a rapidly changing world. I am grateful to have Professor Farrell chatting with me today. Well, Theo, thank you so much for joining me in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I am eternally grateful for your time.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Ali. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. This is a special edition, which I call The Outer Game of Change. Basically, it's the leaders and the sponsors like yourself that we usually, people like me in the field of change, we look at you as a leader that makes the decisions, and those decisions become changes that we try to facilitate in the workplace. And I want to cover a lot around the notion of change, but let us start first with your journey as a leader. You recently landed in a top job leading Trobe University. Share with us this journey.
Yeah, thanks. Good place to start. And really, I suppose one of my reflections is how I ended up becoming an academic and from that becoming a leader of a university. There's not a lot of people who end up academics, but in my case, it was really following my father's footsteps. So my father was a professor at University College in Dublin. As a small child, he used to take me to university. And so I remember essentially growing up in a university. It was just a natural home for me. And my father was this was he was starting out as an academic in the late 50s and 60s in Dublin. And he was one of the founding academics working in the new field of political science. So really, he was a wonderful lecturer, as he was famous for his lectures. Really, he was very theatrical in his performance, but also an innovative scholar in his own right. And so in essence, I just followed in his footsteps and became an academic. But also my brother, and my older brother, his name is David Farrell. He's a professor of politics also in University College Dublin. He's got the same job essentially as my father. But previously, he was head of the social sciences school at the University of Manchester, which is the largest school of social sciences in the United Kingdom. And so really through my brother's experience, I could see a leadership journey. So I had the opportunity to go to King's College London in 2005. And by 2013, I had become head of department. It was the Department of War Studies. which is quite a large department. So it's about 100 faculty, and it's a few hundred other researchers that are attached to it, doctoral researchers and adjuncts. And that was a wonderful opportunity to work in a really the top department in its field in the world. We work on things like innovation in online learning. So we really expanded in online learning quite early on, actually. That was a fascinating experience because of its time. That was quite early on. Opportunity to grow. So in the 3 years I was head of department, we grew by 30% in terms of revenue and students. So we designed new courses to grow. Did a piece of work around high performance culture that the university was engaged with. So this was a project led by Shishir Kapoor, who is now actually he's the president of King's, but at the time he was effectively a deputy provost. So I worked with him as part of the core team on looking at how you drive high performance in a university. That was interesting. But also a lot of work around engaging beyond the university. And so that really shaped my approach to leadership, which is around external engagement, partnerships, around thinking about, how you drive performance in an academic culture, and also looking for opportunities to innovate. It was a wonderful time.
I'm keen to hear your thoughts around you're a professor of war studies. I would imagine that this would have given you a lot of insight into human history, behaviors, historical events. I would imagine, this would build a lot of empathy in the way you think about humans.
Yeah, it is interesting being a professor of war studies. And the first thing I would say is it's not the case that academics who work on war think war is a good thing, but rather they see war as an enduring feature of the world system and of human culture. And so you want to study war to understand the challenges of armed conflict. But I'm an expert on modern militaries and how they work and how they innovate, actually. And so there's a few kind of reflections around this that have helped me as a leader. I mean, the first is the military, certainly Western militaries, they're very serious about leadership and the development of leadership.
Yes.
Among all the sectors, they're the ones that invest most in leadership, in investing leadership skills. So very interesting to study how militaries develop leadership. And in particular in the West, there's a doctrine that emerged out of the 1980s called mission command, and is now the dominant doctrine among Western militaries. And it's got real insights for leadership in any sector. And in essence, what mission command is about is militaries are very hierarchical, and so that would suggest that the person at the top says you're going to do X, Y, Z, and everyone down below just follows orders. That's not actually how it works under mission command. The job of the general or the senior officer is to explain why the military is doing this operation or that operation. So what is the overall goal or objective, and why is the military engaged in that? But to leave it to subordinate officers to determine how. So very importantly, it's a doctrine against micromanagement. And so, look, in reality, people are people. Some leaders are more micromanagers than others. But broadly speaking, the doctrinal approach of Western militaries is to encourage an initiative by junior leaders. That has very important lessons about leadership. The other is around strategy and how strategy works. And I think in the business world, most people misunderstand strategy and how it works. So most people think strategy is around about defining objectives, defining the ways that you're going to achieve those objectives, and then aligning means. So hence a means, ways, ends. That's really, in my mind, a plan. In most cases, you actually have a plan, and you're saying over the next 10 years or 5 years or whatever, we're going to try and achieve that. And these are the capabilities we're going to develop in order to achieve that plan. Strategy is something different. Strategy tends to be when you're facing a particular challenge or competitive environment that's dynamic. So it could be in a marketplace, you're facing a competitor that's developing a new service or technology, or somehow the market is being disrupted and it's challenging your business model. So you start with a problem in strategy, and you're dealing with a dynamic problem. And then what the job of strategy is to define what is the 1 or 2 or 3 key things you can do to actually gain competitive edge. So it's really about focus. And so one of the challenges in most business strategies, which are really plans, is they're overly complicated. There's too many moving parts. When in essence, the key of strategy is to break it down to the very few key things and then focus attention on those key things that would give you the competitive edge. and that will enable you to meet the challenge that's before you.
I like that. In my mind, a plan is slightly more rigid than a strategy. A strategy is far more dynamic, and it's like a soccer game. There's always a plan, but there's a lot of strategy that happens to adjust. Talking about adjustment, I'm keen to understand from your perspective, Theo, the university as an entity, how is that different from a normal business organization, as in organizations that run business for profit? How is that from a structure, from a culture, from where you sit? How do you see change being adopted in the higher education setting than in a dynamic environment like in a retail environment?
Yeah, I mean, that's really, I guess that's very important, actually, certainly from the point of view of how we look at our, the challenges we have in higher education and the lessons we might draw from the business world about how we might meet those challenges. The first thing I would point out is that, universities are very significant from most businesses because of the complexity of value creation. So for most businesses, value creation is primarily around providing a great service or product for your customers and then generation revenue from that. So it's pretty straightforward. But for universities, value creation is much more complex because of the multiple purposes and stakeholders of universities. So value creation is around enhancing life opportunities for people. Value creation is around creating, helping communities in terms of their development, and it's around also advancing scientific knowledge and achieving benefit for society, for people from that knowledge. So it's a much more complex thing, value creation. And of course, it does involve revenue because we need revenue to drive our business. And that's partly explains why when you think about academia, which the university at the core of the universities is the academy, academia is essentially almost anti-business. So, in academia, people don't think of courses as products, although arguably that's what they are. They don't think of students as customers. And in fact, many academics would strongly push back at the idea of students as customers. They see students as engaged in a learning journey, and we work with students on that learning journey. I mean, absolutely, it's true partly, but it's also true that students are customers, and increasingly they see themselves as customers because they're paying quite a lot for the product that you provide, which are the courses. And there's data that clearly shows this. And so I think there's, as universities, it's behoven on us to actually look at the quote unquote customer experience and what we can learn from the discipline of CX or customer experience to improve our student experience. That's an idea that, many academics wouldn't necessarily agree with. And the last I would say is around our business model. Because as a sector, our business model has essentially remained unchanged in decades. When you look at the core of the business model, it's about delivering courses that will last for postgraduate 1 or 2 years, for undergraduate between 3 and 5 years. That basic, students are charged fees against those courses. Those courses are delivered by academics who have a lot of control over the content of those courses. They're delivered in classrooms. Students are provided with learning materials, and then there's assessment through essays and exams or practicals. That's remained unchanged for decades. You could go back 20 years and you'd find essentially the same suite of products, the same broad experience of how students consume those products and how we charge for them. And that the majority of our students would be students who leave school. That model has remained very unchanged, partly because it's heavily regulated by the state, and also it's quasi-funded. So the core of the funding is actually provided via the state. Even the amount you can charge is regulated by the state. And so because of all this regulation that's around it, and because also of the institution of the academy, which we can talk about later, but it's a very traditional institution. It goes back 1,000 years. It's actually very, very hard to disrupt. So there are a few noted examples, but broadly speaking, universities the world over, and certainly in the Western world, have largely remained unchanged for many, many decades, and arguably a century or so. And so that's quite interesting to come into that environment where we know broadly in our society, technology is driving so much change, such rapid change in services and products. And yet we are working in a sector that is quite resistant to change, actually, for all sorts of reasons.
What are some of the ideas that you've got already circling in your mind around maybe nudging that structure into the future?
It's interesting because it's around identifying where are the areas or what are the things that cause that resistance to change? And then how do you think about those things? And so the first is actually the nature of the academy. So the academy is built on disciplines. As much as for many, many years, universities have been trying to work on multidisciplinary research and research across disciplinary boundaries to identify innovative solutions to the challenges facing our societies. The reality is that most of the work that's conducted in universities is conducted within these disciplinary boundaries. So it could be, whatever it is, English, history, anthropology, psychology, or we're in the sciences, chemistry, biology, and so forth. Now, disciplines are very important because knowledge accumulates through those disciplines. And when you look at the development of scientific knowledge, it is an accumulative exercise that over time understandings develop about, what is scientifically proven and what is open to scientific challenge. And that process is an accretive process over time. So disciplines and the tradition that come with them are actually important to the academic exercise. But it means that academics are very focused on their disciplines. And in essence, we have a workforce that is highly creative. It's a creative workforce. It's very important that workforce, that academics feel empowered, because that's what's going to drive them in their work and support them in their work. But it also means that when you work with an academic community and you try and drive a program of change, it's a bit like herding cats. Right? So they all want to do it their own way and they go different directions. And that's, as I said, that's part of working with a fabulously diverse creative community. But it means that driving change is difficult, actually. And another reason why, so because of all these silos within disciplines, but because also academics within those silos tend to do their own thing. And there are a few particular issues that are challenging. One is when you look at universities versus other organizations, the turnover of staff is very low. And when I was referring previously to the piece of work I did at King's on high performance culture, we looked at various sectors and we looked at really high performing organizations like Google and, what were the major drivers of change? And in really high performing organizations, you tend to get, you get a core stable workforce, but you get quite a degree of change as well. And that's what brings new ideas and that drives high performance. So as I recall from memory, Google would typically turn over 10% of its workforce. This was back in the late 2000s. Academic workforces tend to be more stable. There tends to be lower turnover. So that means you don't have that change function that's driving it. But at the same time, it means you've got strong communities, which are really great. External regulation is a real drag and change. And so you have to try and work that. And lastly, as you probably know, universities have all sorts of legacy systems, IT systems, as well as business processes, and they are major drags in change. And so, in fact, right now, as we're on the cusp of technology-powered change, it's occurring across our sector. For all universities, the large suite of legacy IT systems we have, which would be horrendously complex and expensive to change, are a major drag on innovation. Although I was really struck talking to a business leader the other day that they said, and this is someone in finance, and they said, don't think we have it that much better where we are. That in fact, even in finance, many organizations have legacy systems, and the cost and complexity of changing those systems is a significant challenge.
My understanding, and I think you just validated that understanding, is that, the academic world they value their creativity and autonomy. And these are the two areas where it does happen, but it happens at a probably slower pace than what the leadership would usually expect. And obviously that low percentage of natural attrition, that's probably a good thing for a lot of universities, especially if you want to keep the talent in the university. We're establishing that the setting is not, or driving change in this setting is not an easy undertaking, but it does take time. From my experience also, and because I work in the field of change, the difficulty always relies on one factor, which is the people side of things. So how would you suggest some of the engagement strategies that people like me in the business of change to probably consider when we go into a higher education sector?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I think the first thing is, for people like yourself who are leading teams driving change, like core teams driving change, it's the first point is the extent to which the senior leadership is really driving change. I mean, it's going to be very hard to drive change as part of a team that's supposed to do it, if at the level at the very top of the university you don't have senior leadership that's really fully committed to that change.
Yeah.
And look, it's really common in universities where at a mid-level there's some really great work being done, but the senior leadership isn't really advocating, pushing, supporting it, and then it's harder to get traction. And also, to what extent at the very top is there real clarity of vision? So do you have a real clear sense of the direction of change, not the specifics, but the direction of change and why it's important? So I think, that's something that we at Trobe are thinking about as we think about AI and how we embrace AI and really drive AI right across our business and our community. So and we are beginning to develop that vision of where we want to go. And it's still emerging, but the more that you can get clarity of vision, what's the direction of change, even if you don't know what the end point looks like, why are you moving along that trajectory, and communicating that to the entire community, because that's the entry point. So then when a change team comes along and works with parts of the academic or non-academic community in the university, part of the university community, the university community understands why that change team has certainly arrived on the doorstep and said, let's start doing this and that. I think also, because we have creative workforces, the more we can do structured co-design, the better. And so co-design is really key because that's how you get buy-in and people are really invested. So it produces sustainable change because people can see their fingerprints and their contribution to the change that's going forward. I use the word structured, really, that's important for me because initially when you're trying to unleash change, you might have a period of time which is unstructured. You just want this messy excitement around change and you want to encourage people to embrace it. But before too long, you want to actually refine it along certain vectors where you're going to invest and drive change enterprise-wide. And so structured co-design, when you engage with communities on the ground, parts of the business, parts of the academic community, and you work with teams and individuals around how you might change this particular area of the university or that area of the university, you do want it still to be structured, because at the end of the day, you want to end up with something that is coherent in terms of where you're trying to go. And the last I would say is around authentic engagement. And by that, I mean, just recognizing we don't have all the answers, we don't have all the ideas. We want to actually harness the creativity, the brilliance of our community. Universities are stuffed full of brilliant people. And creative people. They're fabulous, fabulous organizations to work in because there's so much fascinating diversity and brilliance in universities. If you want to harness that, you have to be authentic. So it means rethinking what you might want to do because you get really compelling alternative ideas and feedback. So I think those ideas around clarity of vision, structured co-design, and authentic engagement, if you do those things, I think you're more likely to get stakeholder buy-in and produce sustainable change.
A couple of thoughts from me I want to share with you, Theo, just based on what you mentioned. I really like the notion of a co-design change. But also I always think that at its core, change is an improvement on the way things are being done. I've been thinking about this recently, and I had one of my guests talking about it. One of the things that we always forget to mention in the business of change is that we forget to honor the past. The past has served us to get us to a stage. And I often see resistance happens because people say, well, it's not broken, so why would you try to change it? And so if we don't honor that, then we're actually sending the wrong message, and immediately we create that heat in the system, which manifests itself as a resistance in whatever capacity. And the last point I want to share, you call that authentic engagement. I call that an organizational change empathy, which is basically, it's a deal from an organization to its employees, is that when we introduce a change, we promise that we were going to engage with you, we're going to communicate the benefits, we're going to train you, we're going to support you. And if you're going to step up, it's a safe environment, that's okay, because disruption is part of it. Even thinking about things like, this in the real business world, sometimes we expect a lot from people, but we never consider adjusting their KPIs, for example. So in the business of change, we're going to have to allow this particular disruptive period, which I call the messy middle, because learning, as you would know, is not really a straightforward process to learn something new. In fact, learning can be quite messy and people go at different speeds. And so I call that organizational change empathy. But I also call that there's another empathy which I call employee change empathy, meaning the employee will have to also come halfway. It's a team sport. The employee will have to show up to training, will have to be able, will ask questions, will contribute if they like to those changes. So these are I'm just sharing some of the thoughts that, with you that sort of triggered when you were talking about those three elements, and I really enjoyed them. Where does the middle management sit in the scheme of things within the higher education?
And just before I answer your question, I love those points, Ali. And I think you really express it nicely around the importance of honoring the past. I think, and I absolutely agree about the points around empathy, and in particular, just more broadly, I think as leaders at all levels, success as a leader is highly correlated to the extent to which you create a safe environment for people to express their views, to challenge, to have robust discussions, and to try, to innovate, and expecting people won't necessarily be successful, and learning lessons. So creating that safe environment is, I think, the single most important thing you can do as a leader. And empathy is really, really a key part of that as well. So I think those are really powerful arguments. In terms of middle management, we've just launched a new leadership framework and set of resources at Trobe, and it's around developing leadership at all capacities in the university. And of course, that's also part about, developing your pipeline of leaders across the university. But I think we do need to think about leadership at all levels. And that middle level, it depends how you look at how you view that, but that could be people who are leading particular teams that are providing very important business functions. They're critical, actually, because, for instance, I think about the work that the AI Acceleration Task Force, are doing at La Trobe, which is really fantastic, and working with particular teams and developing, AI skills in those teams and seeing how that might improve their productivity and develop new ways of doing things. Well, it's critical that those teams are led by people who really drive that innovation. And so at all levels, we need to have leaders who create the safe space for their teams to perform at the best level, that are empathetic, and that embrace the challenge of innovation, actually. And so the middle management is really, really important, actually. But I think leadership at all levels is really, really important in an organization.
The reason why I mention this particular group of leaders and managers is because when I work in the field and the factory floor, I see these people and I have lunch with them and I engage with them and I see their importance. And so whilst the top leadership is important, as you mentioned, all levels are important, but this particular group, they're like the sandwich between the leaders and the vision and the daily operations of the practicality of life on what I call the dance floor, basically. The leaders can be on the balcony, but the dance floor is full of the middle managers. And we see them in my field as really critical. We would like to become friends with them, and we would like to enable them because, in my view, this is the secret sauce to create a sustainable change. If you don't get this particular group engaged and on board and enabled, the change will not be sustainable. It might happen for a few months, and then really the organization will not be able to realize the benefits.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more, actually. And what I really like about the culture at La Trobe University is when senior leaders are reporting to me about some particular success, and it could be a big grant that's been secured. It could be, some big win around student experience. It could be some real success in a particular business function. There's a habit of really calling out the middle managers that led the teams and really crediting the success to them. And so all of the people in my senior executive, the level just below them, the division leads, when they report that success, they're constantly calling out the team lead below them. And so I think that says a lot about the culture of the organization, that you are shining a light on team leaders, that middle level of managers who are actually really achieving, successful results. And it highlights the importance of that level in terms of driving performance, driving change. For me, that is a really sign of a healthy leadership culture, actually, that practice is very common.
Theo, I'd like to shift gear and talk about AI and talk about this disruptive technology that is not new, but it's been on the rise very quickly recently. How do you see that technology disrupting the higher education sector?
Look, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because just over a couple of years ago, we had ChatGPT appear on the scene quite quickly. And within a couple of months, you had 100 million users, famously supposed to be the fastest adoption of a product in human history. But it really opened eyes to how generative AI was going to drive change right across our societies and economies. And I think we are looking at something which is on a scale of the Industrial Revolution. So when you look at the world before 1800 and the world after 1900, they're two different worlds. You had zero economic growth. It was, before 1800, very little change in people's lives. Their circumstances was largely defined by no change over your lifetime. After 1900, you had an acceleration in economic growth across the industrializing world, and change became the dominant narrative and experience of people's lives. So it's like an ontological change in human society that occurred over about 90 years, actually, in the 1800s. I think the AI revolution is going to be something similar. It's going to drive ontological change in our existence and how we experience the world, how we understand the world, how we organize our economies and our societies. It's going to be profound change, but it'll probably unfold quite quickly within 10 or 20 years, so much faster than the Industrial Revolution. And so when you get into the future of work, what that looks like, it's going to be very significant change. And there's various consultancies that have suggested the scale of change, 65, 70% of job roles being either displaced or profoundly changed in terms of what people do in those roles. I think the reality is we don't quite know. We don't quite know how much change there will be. We don't quite know how fast it will unfold, but we know it's going to be very large and very quick, actually. And so for higher education, that means change across everything we do. How we prepare our students. I mean, all universities are essentially focused on empowering students for their futures. What that actually means now is we have to get serious about how, by the time our students graduate, their work and their workplace and their futures will be profoundly different. And so we have to start moving quite quickly to change our curriculum, to embed AI in what we teach and how we teach. And I think the challenge we're going to face in the next few years is we're going to have students arriving using AI tools, expecting that their skills in AI will be increased by the university over their course of study. And we're currently not prepared to do that, actually. So that's a big challenge for us. The other is AI is already powering scientific discovery. So what happened with AlphaFold and how protein structures, DeepMind, were basically able to model, millions of protein structures and make that freely available. And that is just profoundly changed the bio-innovation, is a good example of how AI could unlock scientific discovery. And so as universities, we now need to develop the capabilities to take this work forward. And so I'm really looking forward, for instance, on Friday here at Trobe, we're going to launch our new Centre for AI and Medical Innovation, which is being funded by the Victorian State Government. That is going to power biotechnology innovation here in Melbourne. So really exciting frontiers. And I guess the last area for universities is, we have large populations of students that are with us. We have responsibilities for their health and well-being. We have responsibilities to support them in their learning journey. Here at La Trobe, we've got about 30,000 students, for instance. That's a massive business challenge because it's incredibly hard to provide this level of support that we really want to provide to students at scale, although I think we do a pretty good job, actually. But AI opens up the opportunity to provide truly personalized 24/7 support. and in particularly supporting students from equity backgrounds or students who might have particular health and well-being needs. We're going to be able to support those students at scale in a much more personalized way. So there's huge opportunity, but the challenge for universities is how we invest in those capabilities and how we drive that change across our organization to deliver those outcomes for our students and for our communities.
It's going to put a lot of pressure on leaders like yourself to be clear on your priorities and where you want to start. In my head, the image is technology is actually a train on train tracks, so they go from A to B and they go fast. The business world is like you've got a car. You cannot go at the same speed. You still need to navigate traffic and all of these things, and which means you're going to have to be very clear on your destinations. Have I got this close to right?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think the inclination is to think of an analogy like a train track or a car and speed of change. Arguably, though, where we are now is we're a boat on water. So we can go faster, but we can change direction.
Yeah,
we're not stuck on a train track. And actually, arguably, as much as earlier I'd said it's very hard to disrupt the business model for universities, we probably are now reaching the stage where we have to take seriously the challenge of disruption so that we can deliver education and learning opportunities to much wider, broad spectrum of people, better suited to meet their lives and the challenges of their lives. And we know, for instance, that Industry 4.0, AI and automation, it's going to transform work for everyone, including people who have been to university, they've graduated, they're like decades into their jobs, but they're going to need to be upskilled to meet the needs of Industry 4.0. And universities need to provide that upskilling as well as non-university providers. And so we are now going to have to think about how we provide lifelong learning to tens of thousands of learners, and the volume of learning, mature age, post-25 learning is going to very significantly increase. So that will challenge us, it will disrupt us actually. I think it's over time and a good thing. And AI is both a driver of this because of how it's changing our societies and economies, but also an enabler if we embrace AI in how we transform ourselves. So it's a very exciting time, but it's true that as leaders of universities, we have to rise to that challenge, and it'll be interesting to see where we go actually with that.
Exciting times ahead, certainly, Theo. I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation. I am aware of time and your time. One last question that I usually ask my guests: as a leader in a wonderful setting, and La Trobe University is a very well-known university, what would be your advice to us, people like me in the business of change and communication, when it comes to change in the higher education sector?
I think, the first thing I would say is, as somebody who comes in and supports program of change in a university, I think it is very important to understand the core difference between the academic workforce and the non-academic workforce. We really do have two different workforces. And the non-academic workforce will be very familiar to anyone who's worked in business or government. That part of the workforce tends to be very receptive to change programs and in a sense is a workforce where you can drive change in a way that you might in the business sector. But the academic workforce is fundamentally different. As I said, it's a highly creative, brilliant, absolutely brilliant and highly creative workforce, but values autonomy very highly. And so it is about how you work with those two different workforces. But the other is, and I think, Ali, you alluded to it, it sounds like you practiced this already, it's the importance of building those relationships and networks across the university to understand where are the people that you can work with to drive change, and where are the people that you need to bring on the journey. There's so many examples in universities of academics and professional staff who work together in teams. And where that team works together, it's really powerful, to bring together those different skill sets. But we also know in the business, there's lots of areas where academics and professional staff work side by side, but they don't really work in a team. And there's particular reasons why that's the case. And yet we need them to work as a team. And so it's understanding how we get both workforces working more coherently across the entire university as a team is really the enabling piece that we need to work on.
That's a very valuable advice. And I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I'm grateful for your time, Theo. I hope I can get you back at some stage in the future and we talk more about the AI space. You've got your ideas, but until next time, stay well and stay safe.
Thanks, Ali. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode valuable, remember to subscribe to stay updated on upcoming episodes. Your support is truly appreciated. And by sharing this podcast with your colleagues, friends, and fellow change practitioners, it can help me reach even more individuals and professionals who can benefit from these discussions. Remember, and in my opinion, change is an enduring force, and you will only have a measure of certainty and control when you embrace it. Until next time, thank you for being part of the Inner Game of Change community. I am Ali Jama, and this is the Inner Game of Change podcast.